Think that quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards? How about that receiver in Miami grabbing a touchdown? Check out DraftKings Pick6, the newest way to compete against others and play fantasy football to win cash with DraftKings. Pick a player and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat like yards, touchdowns, catches, and more. Get your picks right and you'll win cash. Download the new DraftKings Pick6 app now and use code BALLERS. That's code BALLERS for new customers to play $5 and get $50 in Pick6 credits guaranteed, plus 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on us. Offer expires 9/19, only on DraftKings Pick6. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos. One per new customer. Reward issued as $50 in non-withdrawable Pick6 credits that expire in 6 months. NFL Plus Premium offer available only to new and former NFL Plus subscribers. Additional NFL Plus Premium terms at NFL.com/terms.
Introducing the new Versed Limitless Pant Collection. Reimagined to deliver effortless style, mobility, and comfort, the new Limitless Collection features moisture-wicking, 4-way stretch fabric that's wrinkle-resistant and doesn't lose fit. Plus, the updated design offers a functional and classic look with unmatched versatility. The new Versed Limitless Pant Collection. Pants made for movement. Available only at Dick's Sporting Goods. Shop now at dicks.com/limitless.
The DFS Studio is brought to you by DraftKings. Welcome to the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast with your hosts, Kyle Borganoni and Matthew Betz.
Welcome in. It's Friday, September 27th here on the podcast they said couldn't happen. It's the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast. I am your host, Kyle Borganoni, and I am joined, as always, by Matthew B. My Forrest Gump Betz.
They said it couldn't happen? Who said that? Who are these people, Kyle?
All the haters, all of the weathermen and women out there.
Kyle, I mean, he's been battling today just to get on the mic. You know, in all seriousness, Kyle's internet has been down most of the afternoon on Thursday, and we were like, for a hot minute, am I going to have to solo record an hour talking about fake football, daily fantasy sports by myself? That would be a train wreck for everybody involved, including me. So good thing that didn't happen. Good thing the internet is on. In all seriousness, to all of you out there in the Southeast, hope everybody is safe. A lot going on with the hurricane and all that. So hopefully you all are safe. Wishing you guys well this weekend as everybody, battles that. So.
Yes. I currently right now, I'm like Lieutenant Dan in the midst of the storm, and Betz is just holding on for dear life because the whole day it's been, maybe we can record, who knows? It does make you realize that when your power's out for a long period of time, or if you're in the parts of the US right now like Florida and your power does go out, you're like, wow, we are very dependent on this just to do anything. Like my kids had no idea what to do.
Yeah, because they had at home digital learning today, right? So what were they doing?
Yeah, what do you digital learning without the digital part?
Dude, just like the old days. Just reading books? I mean, come on.
What'd you guys do? Oh, I was doing this thing my parents talked about. It's called Books, which is, I consider myself a reader, an avid reader. My wife is a reading intervention coach in schools. And so my kids didn't want to read today. That's not what they wanted to do, apparently.
Of course not.
So we are glad that you are with us this episode. We're glad we actually get to make it happen. It's week 4. We're going to talk about the main slate, our cash picks, the games we want to stack, our slate breakers, and oh mama, there is a slate breaker that I am enthralled to talk about. I also have a great sponsor for us today, Betz. I secured one while my power was out. And let's just say I was rummaging through my pantry and go, oh, I didn't know we had this. And so got on the phone. They became a sponsor.
All right. Well, I'm glad you still had cell service, even though you didn't have internet, to make sure that this sponsor could get locked in for this, 5-minute segment.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And then Borg versus Betz. We're still running hot, people, on the year. when it comes to props. So hopefully you can still ride with us if you play Pick6 on DraftKings. That should be good. We're going to jump straight into cash.
Straight cash, homie.
We're not farting around in this episode because I have no idea if 10 minutes from now things just come crashing down. So we're going to just keep this thing rolling. And in our cash picks, I hate that we're having the same conversation we've had the last couple weeks, but it's kind of just whittled down to two guys. And I think when you flip over the cards on Sunday, you will find that people are either playing Kyler or Jaden. And I feel like it's a coin flip for me right now.
Yeah, I agree. I do think it's a coin flip. And I think if you need the $300 on DraftKings to drop down to Jaden Daniels, like I would not be upset about that at all. Both guys, obviously in the same game. It's the best game environment on the slate. The only game with a 50-point total. There are a couple of weather-ish spots on the East Coast this week. This is not one of them, so that's not even a concern. And then you get two matchups for both quarterbacks where the pass defense is abysmal. I mean, with Kyler, we know the story with Washington. You play a quarterback against Washington every single week. 31st in YPA, 32nd in EPA. No defense has allowed more passing touchdowns this year. Going back to last year, that's still true. So Kyler just sets up so well. Now, one negative you could say, if you wanted to say a negative, is that Trey McBride is probably not playing in this game. So he's down a weapon, but at the same time, he's been running a ton, averaging almost 54 rushing yards per game this year is Kyler. So he's been so effective for fantasy. That floor-ceiling combo in this matchup is awesome. They're at home. They have the highest team total on the slate. On the other side, we're coming off a game where Jaden Daniels looked pretty good against the Bengals. And now he gets Arizona, they've actually been sneaky good against the run recently. Meanwhile, they are allowing a ton through the air, 7.3 YPA. That's 30th in the league, and registering the 6th lowest pressure rate is Arizona. So you get clean pockets, you get the rushing, especially at the goal line with Jaden Daniels, So it's kind of all there to make an argument for both guys. Do you have a lean on either one yet?
I've gone back and forth where I did some lineups where the savings just mattered and I needed it to get up elsewhere, but Kyler feels so safe at home when he's not pressured. That was my bugaboo last week, right? When we talked about Detroit, it's like, I don't love this. I didn't love the matchup for him. McBride being out's not great. He will have your boy, Tip Ryman. I made sure I looked up the pronunciation. Tip Ryman.
Okay.
That doesn't actually influence my decision at all. I think Jaden right now gets a slight edge from the savings, and the beautiful part of the Washington Commanders is because that defense is going to be so bad, he's always going to be like in attacking mode. Like I feel like they're never going to be able to take their foot off the gas. So I think Jaden is who I prefer as of this recording, but Kyler feels safer. Like if I have the cash. So those are our two quarterbacks. I'm pretty sure we will land there, and we will have all of our picks in the best plays. Did want to mention CJ Stroud on FanDuel, who is cheaper than Jaden Daniels. If you told me that CJ Stroud would basically have 3 weeks that are just so for fantasy, he has hit 20 fantasy points, and we're getting him at home in a great spot at a cheaper price, that sounds really great. We'll talk about that game in just a second for tournaments, but I mean, if you want to play Stroud and cash at 7.8 on FanDuel, like I have no issues.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, the only knock, of course, is that he probably won't have Tank Dell, which is a bummer. Of course, Tank Dell, we think he's a baller, a superstar. So that's one weapon down, but he's still got Diggs. He's still got Nico. The Jags are, I mean, it's week 4 and it already feels like their season is over. It's crazy. And last year, the splits with Stroud at home and against bad defenses, he just slayed. And this is that scenario here at home. So I like Stroud. For tournaments, we'll talk about it. But yeah, on FanDuel, I do think he's in play for cash, as are the two guys we just talked about, Jaden and Kyler.
At running back, the expensive options are Breece Hall, we like a lot at 7.8 against Denver. He's going to see a ton of work. And Alvin Kamara, I'm totally fine spending there. I think with Kamara, he wasn't on the injury report Wednesday. Do we know anything about Thursday?
So he was back on Thursday. Still waiting to see the final report on that, so you'll know by Friday where he's at. But it does seem like he's maybe not 100%. It's hard to say. On top of that, I do have some concerns about New Orleans just in general. The conversation all offseason was, dude, this offensive line is kind of a train wreck. And they've sort of hit it through the first 2.5 weeks. They were not great against the Eagles, but they hit it against the first two teams they played and were so efficient. But now they have more injuries to an already, on paper, not great offensive line. So I have some concerns that is in play here against the Falcons. So I think I'm off Kamara for cash personally, just with that in mind, given that there's so many good running back plays on the slate. Like we'll talk about, Chuba and Akers is in play and Jordan Mason every single week. And, Brian Robinson with Austin Eckler out, I think is in play. And there's just so many good plays at running back that if I can find anyone on the list that like, you know what, you can poke holes in this spot with the O-line issues, for me, I think I'm off Kamara and cash.
Yeah, I think Kamara, they might manage his touches with Taysom back. And so I think you might not see as many between the tackle stuff. His line was, it was a little higher than I wanted to. His rushing and receiving line was at 100.
Oh, wow.
And a half. I just felt like that was very, very high. Now, obviously, he's a player that can take, any number and just be an outlier. He's always done it against the Falcons too. We will be talking about one of his props that I like later on, but in cash, I can see going elsewhere. We talked about Mason. We talked about him on Tuesday's show at 6.7. I just can't move off him. Like I'm started building my lineup. I'm like, he's going to see the volume. They're double-digit favorites. They're at home. There's just so many things to like. So apart from just he burned me last week, we just move on, and I think he's just a solid play again.
Yeah, last week, what you looked for was the volume in, I would say, a positive game script for 3/4 of that game. Obviously, the Rams pulled off the upset, but you still got the touches, you still got the workload. In 3 games this year that McCaffrey obviously has not played, he's averaging 23.7 total opportunities and 115 scrimmage yards. You're going to take that in a matchup where you're favored by 10 points against the Patriots, where, Debo is probably not playing in this game. We'll see on Kittle, but he could be less than 100%. Obviously, McCaffrey is still out. So, like, again, the volume should be there. This is like a workload projection that should be closer to like 8K on DraftKings. So you're getting a massive discount still, even though the price is going up, it's not going up enough, which means yet again, he's in play for cash games.
The 5K running backs, I think, is going to be where people sort out. Like I probably will pay up for Brees. Mason feels like a near lock for me at this point of just like, I'm going to build that way as a favorite. And then I'm trying to figure out with these 5K running backs who I like. So Chuba Hubbard at 5.7, saw a ton of work, 26 touches last week. And you kind of saw, wow, this is an offense that actually can function at an NFL level. What do they do? We'll talk about that game in a second. So Chuba Hubbard at 5.7. I wanted to at least mention Najee Harris at 5.6 if Jalen Warren's out against the Colts, who are just getting annihilated on the ground. Like teams have decided that the way that you beat the Colts is that you let them beat themselves by not tackling anybody at all. So I think Najee's in there. Cam Akers is in there at 5.3. So do we know anything about Mixon and Pierce? Because nobody felt great about Akers last week, but I feel like this is a better matchup for him at home, where I can just see myself going right back to him.
Yeah, real quick on Najee. He has not scored a rushing touchdown yet this year. He has carried the ball 20, 17, and 18 times. He was the cover boy for Marv's expected fantasy points regression model. So I think Najee's finding the end zone this week, and I don't think Jalen Warren plays. So did want to point that out there.
I got actually a hot stat on that.
Please.
One. Look, the Colts through 3 games so far, I've seen 121 rush attempts against them. That's the most of any team since 2013. Like, teams are just controlling the clock. This is like Arthur Smith football. Control the clock, win with defense. So I think Najee is set up really well, and I like his price.
Yeah, for sure. He's in the conversation. Back to Cam Akers, though. Last week, I kind of like reluctantly played him. Like, it didn't feel great. But again, we're trending towards the same situation of Dameon Pierce still out, Joe Mixon unlikely to play. And so now you get Cam Akers. Yes, he's 5,300. But as John Daigle noted on Twitter, without Mixon and Pierce available last week, Akers did handle 10 of 13 running back touches at 77% before the game got out to like a 31-7 lead. So as long as the game stays reasonably close, I think we're going to see a lot of work for Cam Akers. And I think that's a safe projection because I do think Houston takes care of business this week against the Jags, who are reeling. They're at home. They're favored by a touchdown in this spot. So, I still have like an uneasy feeling about it, but it's 5,300, right? And how bad could it be for Cam Akers? So I think he's in play, even though there's, like I said, there's just so many good plays in this range. We mentioned, Brian Robinson briefly. You just mentioned Najee, Chuba Hubbard. I think even Zach Moss is in consideration. Like, there's so many good plays in this range that I wouldn't fault anyone for going that way. But I think Cam Akers, that savings to drop off of like the 6K range does make a lot of sense for some of the wide receiver plays.
Yeah, when it comes to tournaments, I feel like there's going to be a lot of running backs in that 15-ish, maybe 20% roster percentage range where no one's going to get too out of hand. Like Mason's going to be super popular. People want to build with Akers again just because he's cheap. But there's a bunch of dudes that this week, I mean, I'm seeing like 7, 8 running backs. It's like, oh, they're going to carry roster percentage, and you're going to have so many different combinations, and they all have great median projections. So I can't really talk people out of them for cash or tournaments. Definitely it's a week for running back. On FanDuel, Breece at 8K is a near lock. It's just a crazy price for him and his workload. And then Cam Akers is only 6.1. So those are kind of the ones on FanDuel. You can also get those in the best plays article if you want to get those core plays. Let's go to wide receiver because I want to pay up for at least one dude over 7K. And you're going to tell me, is it Nico Collins at 7.4 or Rashee Rice at 7.3?
Man, I've been on Rashee Rice all summer, weeks 1, 2, 3. And not that Rashee Rice is out of play. Like, he's definitely in play in this matchup. But Nico Collins jumps off the page as like,
oh, baby.
I mean, how many yards is this dude getting? 100? 120? 150? It's endless, Kyle. Because obviously Tank Dell affects his target share. But even with Tank Dell in the lineup and Steph Diggs, he's seen 8+ targets in every game. He's the go-to guy, the first read. And Jacksonville has been destroyed. They let multiple wide receivers go over the receiving line prop in every game this year. Matt Collins got over his prop. Keon Coleman got over his prop. I mean, all these guys are just crushing against Jacksonville. They play a ton of press man coverage. Nico is incredible in that role. So I just want to bet on Stroud this week. I want to bet on Nico. That I think if you're making me pick one of those two guys, I would lean Collins. That said, Rashee Rice, it's really hard to argue with a guy who's very likely to see 10 targets from Pat Mahomes in a good spot. Speaking about that matchup, the Chargers are giving up actually a ton of underneath looks. What does Rashee Rice do? Underneath looks less than 10 yards from line of scrimmage. So I think Nico has a much higher ceiling. I think the floors are comparable for these guys, but I just want to chase that ceiling with Nico.
What the heck do defensive coordinators do in their meetings when they're preparing for Rashee Rice? Like what are they looking at? It's the same exact play.
I don't know. We talked about that on the Dynasty show if you wanted more of a breakdown there. And no Derwin James in the middle of the field either for the Chargers. And real quick, we're not going to talk about that game, but I almost made him my slate breaker, but I chickened out, man. I got scared. Nobody's going to play Travis Kelce this week. And the rhetoric is, I don't know, man. He's old. Like, they're not really getting him looks. Derwin James is out. He's destroyed the Chargers in his career. Leverage off of Rashee Rice for Kelce at 6,800. We would have killed for that price last year, right? Like, I think it's a decent play in tournaments. Now, he's not my slate breaker. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but I just want to point out there for the people that if he does go off, I would like credit.
Because you actually have Noah Gray, they're tied in one as your slate breaker.
Exactly.
Oh, no, but I agree with your point because when you look at the roster percentages for tight end this week, there's going to be a lot of punts. And I was messaged on Discord from a couple different people like, man, should we punt this week? Punt away in cash. Do it. Or play Dallas Goedert. Those are basically the two options. But in tournaments, be willing to get different. Like Dallas Goedert, from a median standpoint at 5.1, we could go, this is a good play. He's going to see, 7 targets, whatever. But like the ceiling outcome, I know we saw it last week, but like, I just feel like there's so many other places that you can go to get leverage on the field because people are going to play him. Gesicki, I'm seeing some Tommy Trimble love, which is not something I usually see. Tucker Kraft, Brenton Strange, those are all the dudes at tight end. That way you and I don't have to spend too much time on tight end. But yes, I agree. I like that call a lot. Back to wide receiver, Brandon Ayuk, 6.4. People were burned last week. Are we playing Ayuk and Mason in cash? Is that still a thing? Because it was a thing last week.
So if I'm picking one of the two, for me it's Mason. But I still think Ayuk deserves to be in strong consideration as one of the best salary-adjusted wide receiver plays on the slate, assuming Debo is still out, which I think he will be, and with Kittle banged up or less than 100%. The dude saw 10 targets last week. If you give me Ayuk with 10 targets most weeks, I'm going to play it. Like if you told me going in you're getting 10 targets with Brandon Ayuk, one of the most talented wide receivers, I'm playing it. Now the box score of success did not work out. Juwan Jennings apparently is Randy Moss, in that game. But this is a matchup against New England that the concern for me is not that it's a scary matchup. It's just that, they are 10-point favorites. if Mason's doing his thing and they do get up by 2 scores in the second half, we've seen that team very willing to take their foot off the gas and just hand the ball off over and over again. So like, I don't think you're getting a ton of back and forth in that game environment, but at the same time, you could argue maybe Ayuk's the reason that game is getting out of hand. So I think he's fine. I think he's in consideration, but I don't think he's as much of a slam dunk as he felt last week against the Rams secondary, who, as we saw with Juwan Jennings, is terrible.
Yeah, there's a couple different tiers. So we talked about the 7K guys, Nico, Rice. You can put Marvin Harrison Jr. in that group, but I think I like it more for tournaments. In the 6K range, it's Ayuk. We like a lot. In the 5K range, it's Deontay Johnson, although I'm seeing right in front of me, he was added to Thursday's injury report with a groin issue, did not practice, but he told reporters, because of the poor field conditions, I didn't practice. So he protected his groin by not practicing. I mean, that's like grade A stuff there.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. I mean, let's make sure he's healthy, but assuming he is healthy, this is a price that you kind of just want to play in cash games. 5,600 against Cincinnati. Man, this Bengals defense is so bad. And apparently Andy Dalton is the next Pat Mahomes. So you just play as wide receiver 1 and good things will happen. In all seriousness, he was the wide receiver 1 in expected fantasy points last week. Now, I'm not sure how to project the pass rate for Carolina moving forward because it was one game with Andy Dalton, but they were top 10 in neutral pass rate last week. You get an adult in the room, so to speak, at quarterback, and good things will happen. Now you have Adam Thielen on IR. It's really tough to see a spot here where like this projection doesn't look great. So assuming the health is clear, I think Deontay is a very strong play for cash in the mid-range.
Yeah, he was targeted on 40% of his routes last week, was second only to Rashee Rice in first read targets. He's a strong play at his cash. I won't be playing Chuba and Deontay together because there are ways that things go south with the Panthers. We'll preview the game, but it's like we're excited for them. We're happy for Andy Dalton. And yet these are usually the moments in DFS where you go, everyone's a little too excited about this. They just assume that the Panthers are going to be competitive. And we've seen the Panthers not be competitive for years. Christian Kirk, I'll talk about him in that game, but I think he's a strong play at his price point at 5.2. I want to mention Darnell Mooney again. He's only 4.4. He's leading the Falcons in receiving yards. He's at least a name that's cheap that you can look at. And then got to come back to the Dortch, man. 4.3. If McBride is out, are you looking at the Dortch in cash?
Yeah, I think you can. This is another week where I don't feel super strong about like the cheap plays. Like I think Mooney's fine. I think the Dortch is fine, but there's no one that stands out a ton for me this week in this spot. So I do think you probably need to punt somewhere in your lineup, which is a consideration. The wide receiver punts are not great. Like I was kind of logging in being like, oh, both Eagles wide receivers might be out. What's Jahan Dotson? 5K for Jahan Dotson? Like, man, that is that is not cheap. I was expecting like 3,500. Johnny Wilson is 3,800. Paris Campbell, Kyle, is 3K if you want to get gross. But I don't think there's a lot of good punts this week. So I'm probably kind of capping it at that Dortch Mooney type range, unless we get more information injury wise. But yeah, that's kind of as low as I would go for cash games. I just don't think there's anybody down there that you feel good about.
Do you want to hear about Jahan Dotson's targets per out run?
No, I don't.
You need to hear this. This is good for you. Okay. He's run 94 routes. How does that make you feel just knowing
the fitness is there?
Okay. The fitness is there. The targets are not, because he's only been targeted 4 times for a 4.3% targets per route run, the lowest in the league.
I saw a quote from Sirianni's presser on Wednesday, and it was phenomenal. It was talking about what he likes about Jahan Dotson, and he was talking about how he's so good in and out of his breaks, his hands, he catches everything, and he said he reminds him a lot of Devonta Smith. I just laughed. I was like, wait, what? Devonta Smith's one of the best wide receivers in the game right now. Jahan Dotson is currently out there doing wind sprints. So that's where we're at. But yeah, I can't play him at 5K in cash. That is way too expensive.
It's so painful, man. It's the worst. All right, defense really quickly. I have the Buccaneers down against your Eagles, who, by the way, they trounced last year in the playoffs. I looked it up and I can't remember. Why did Hurts run the ball one time in the playoffs?
He's
down for one rush attempt.
Well, he was banged up a little bit down the stretch, but also that team they knew they lost before they even snapped the ball.
Yeah, right now, so Eagles, you think of their offensive line running the ball, but in terms of pressure rates on pass attempts, they've allowed the 6th highest rate, and a lot of that is Hurts. He has the 5th most QB pressures of his own accord. That was his fault, running around, a lot of dumb plays. But at 2.7, I like the Buccaneers a lot at home. against your Eagles.
Yeah, I think they're actually a really sneaky tournament play, especially with everybody playing Goddard. If you just say the Eagles fall on their face, which I kind of feel like they might. I mean, Jalen Hurts is going to be throwing to Goddard, who's good, but not incredible. And we just talked about the wide receiver concerns. Like Paris Campbell is on the practice squad, and he's going to play a lot of snaps in this spot, if that tells you anything, assuming Devonta Smith is out. So you have a banged up wide receiver room, a quarterback who's been struggling with turnovers, with pressure, and a right tackle also currently in concussion protocol in Lane Johnson, who's one of the best in the game. Like, it's not hard to see a scenario where the Eagles fall on their face on the road. So I actually really like them in tournaments. For cash, I just want to keep picking on Deshaun Watson, man. I mean, it's so bad. Like, he is literally one of the worst quarterbacks in football right now, including Bryce Young. Like, he's Bryce Young, basically, the two of those guys. Took 8 sacks against the Giants last week, and the Browns just lost another offensive lineman. Now, the Raiders, I don't think are incredible defensively, but, we talked about it on the Tuesday show. Antonio Pierce came out, called him out in public. So they go back home. I think they kind of have a nice little bounce back spot here against one of the worst quarterbacks in the league.
You got to call your team out. The other day, Houston's baseball team, let's just say that they got destroyed, okay? I mean, they just got their butts handed to them, and the coach took them out there, gave them that old talking to. You remember what the coach did to you?
Oh, sure do.
Put you in your place, and on the way home, I said, Houston, what did you learn? I was like, what did the coach say? And his response was, Coach told us we couldn't have snack first. That was his takeaway.
Yeah, that's the most important part of sports, Kyle, okay? It's the snacks.
Yeah. Oh, man. There are some kids that interrupted him 5 times about the snacks, and he was just like, no, we're going to talk about this.
Speaking of Houston,
yeah, Raiders are
before
fine.
we move on, this Jags offense, man, I mean, they are potentially in a negative game script, right? Taking on Houston. I know the Texans did not look awesome last week against the Vikings, but they are still number 1 in quarterback pressure rate. And Trevor Lawrence, in his career against pressure, has been a train wreck. So no Evan Ingram still makes sense to me.
Yep. He's seeing ghosts. If you've seen the videos out there of him this past week.
Move.
I mean, dude, the game was over, I don't know, halfway through the second quarter.
Yeah.
It just, there was no shot at all. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Vitamin Water. So much of what the world is obsessed with starts out in New York City. It's a place full of style and character that has something for everyone. With a range of flavors to meet any kind of taste, it's no wonder Vitamin Water was born there. Colorful, flavorful, anything but boring, Vitamin Water injects a daily dose of vibrancy into a watered-down life. Grab a Vitamin Water today. Vitamin Water is a registered trademark of Glasso.
This episode is brought to you by Polestar. Time is luxury, which is why Polestar spent so much time designing the Polestar 3, their luxury electric performance SUV. It's designed to go further with up to 315 miles of range and immerse you in a unique listening experience powered by 25 speakers. Your favorite daily news podcast has never sounded better. All to make the time you spend behind the wheel of Polestar 3 the best time of your day. Book your test drive at polestar.com.
All right, we're going to highlight 3 games that we want to stack this week, some different ways you can do it. And I think what I want to focus on this week is how to gain leverage in each matchup, because we've talked about that before. There's ways to stack it, and there's ways to say, hey, I think this game fails. Here's what you can do if it fails. So let's talk about it.
Stack Attack.
First game is the Washington Commanders at the Arizona Cardinals. The over-under is at 50, which means what, Betz?
You run, don't walk, to your book, and you take the under.
Yeah, you actually have to go in person and place.
Show up at the counter,
just say,
get a physical ticket,
here.
Go back to your house, sit down on the couch, and root for bad football.
The Cardinals are 3.5-point home favorites, and this game is far and away the best. I think it also helps because we saw Washington in a primetime game. So everybody is excited in some of my home leagues. I mean, I'm starting Jaden Daniels, so I'm feeling great about life. And these are the 2 cash game quarterbacks. So we already know there's going to be a lot of roster percentage in this game, but there is a route where this game fails. And that's what I want to bring up first. And I want to see if you feel the same way, because in my game pace scale, game pace score, I only gave this game a 4 out of 5. And it didn't really get up there, and I started looking at the numbers because both of these teams would prefer to slow the game down. I think that's what they want to do. And Washington, they rank first in run rate when the game remains close. And I think that's what they want to do. I think that with the Cardinals, the same thing. They've been a team that's been successful running the ball the last year and a half under Drew Petzing. And so I just worry, I'm taking the under because that's just the brand at this point. But I worry about this game going back and forth because I think the pieces, like when you want to stack, are actually pretty thin with the quarterbacks. Like I'm only stacking Jaden Daniels with McLaurin. And with Kyler, if McBride's out, it's like I'm probably only doing Marv. And I guess you can get cute in a large field with the Dortch or Michael Wilson, but I worry about this game.
Yes, I actually do as well. And I'm just looking across different books, like seeing where this line is at. Remember we talked on Tuesday, it was at 50.5. It's still at a couple spots, 50.5. It's down to 50 on a few spots. I'm seeing a 49.5 in the market. So already it's kind of trickling down in total. And we're not saying don't play it because it still is the highest game total on the slate. But like you said, the way that this game fails to me is Arizona gets a lead and James Conner is touching the ball over and over and over again. That's kind of what they want to do. They are still run first. They're 9th in neutral situation rush rate. They're at home. They're favored. Washington coming off a short week. I don't think it'd be that shocking if everybody saw what happened on primetime and then they go on the road and they kind of regress a little bit, especially with, I'm not sure how sticky it is. What Cliff did on that game with the deep passes with Terry McLaurin was awesome. But we've got a really long history of Cliff not doing that with just so many short screens and, an extension of the run game basically through these screens, and then Brian Robinson up the gut over and over and over again. So I do kind of like the under here. And so for tournaments, my lean is James Conner just looks like an awesome play. It's not like he's not going to get played by anybody, but when you look at Kyler as the cash quarterback, naturally, if McBride is out, people are going to play, Marv at a high rate for good reason and a cheap tight end. And then it's how do you just get leverage on that and just say James Conner has 2 touchdowns here, the game hits the under? That to me looks awesome, especially where he's priced close to Jordan Mason. People are going to spend up for Brees. I think he gets lost a little bit, maybe around 12 to 15%, which is very reasonable in tournaments. So I like James Conner as leverage in this spot.
Yep, for sure. The quarterbacks are going to be the most popular, which is not a statement you can usually say about a 50-point game. It's usually there's a wide receiver or there's a running back that carries a ton of roster percentage. So, yeah, I think what this team wants to do, the Commanders, is they want to throw short. And I was looking up Jaden Daniels, his splits so far this year. We don't have a ton of information, but he is seeing zone 80% of his dropbacks. It's 6th highest in the NFL. And his ADOT is only 5.2, 6th lowest. So you're right. It's just a bunch of short stuff. Arizona this year has morphed into playing more cover 3, where McLaurin last year had 27% first read target share. I think it's McLaurin, and you get really fortunate if you get a game from McCaffrey or somebody else. But I almost feel like you don't have to stack him. You can play Jaden Daniels naked if you want to. But I just find that I don't really want to stack these 2 quarterbacks that often. I kind of like Kyler and Marv and then B-Rob as the bring back. Or if you want to do Jaden and James Conner and move on. But I'm just running into problems. There's just not enough stacking options unless you think Zach Ertz has deep revenge in his heart.
I mean, if there's anybody who has revenge, Kyle, we know it's him.
What a mean guy.
We know it's him. There's actually a lot of revenge spots this week. Andy Dalton we'll talk about. But yes, I'm with you in that, I guess in the largest field, you could throw a dart at Luke McCaffrey or Noah Brown if you wanted to get super cute. But in the smaller field stuff, I play no chance. So yeah, it's Terry or Ertz, and I just never want to play Ertz in DFS, apparently. So for that reason, it's kind of tough to get excited about a stack. Now, Daniels is running enough close to the goal line that if he gets you 2 rushing scores, 200 passing yards, you're kind of fine, especially for cash games. But I don't really want to stack him, and that's the tricky part in this matchup.
Brian Robinson has 8 carries inside the 10 so far, the second most in the NFL. And I started going backwards because the joke's always been that you drafted the wrong B. Robinson in your drafts. But since the beginning of 2023, Bijan Robinson has averaged 12.9 fantasy points per game. And Brian Robinson has averaged 12.3 fantasy points per game. So it's actually been pretty close. He's averaging a career best 5.2 yards per touch. So he's a player that I'm considering as a wipeout pick in this game. If you think it hits the under, if you think Commanders win, if you think Robinson gets in the end zone twice, I think he's a strong play at his price point. You can play him if you want to. But I did want to bring up this stat because I just feel like there's such few plays that Marv is going to probably get squeezed because of Nico Collins. Like, that was my biggest thing, is the price point pivot of if you want to go from Rice or Nico to Marv, like, there's going to be some roster percentage difference there. Right now, teams are averaging 1.27 fantasy points per dropback against the Commanders coverage. That's man coverage using Commanders.
Nailed it.
That's the worst in the league. I know. If there's one player on this team in one-on-one situations you want to get the ball, it's Marv. So I think Marv is strong. If you wanted to do B-Rob and Marv and just say a correlation play, and I get away from the quarterbacks because there's a ton of roster percentage, totally fine with that too. I just think you just have to be very careful that you're not building this game and just think it's going to go off automatically.
For sure, especially with the line movement coming down. I think that's my biggest takeaway so far from kind of the research throughout this week, is that I do think these teams would prefer to play slower and run the ball. And so you're really banking on efficiency to get there. Now, obviously, in this matchup, we think it probably will happen. But there are paths, as we see every week in DFS, where what you think is going to happen does not. And so for that reason, for tournaments, I definitely want to come in underweight on the stacks and lean into the running backs here.
All right, my Vegas take is the same as yours. Under.
Hammer it, Kyle. This is a 10-unit play. It is locked and loaded. It is guaranteed to hit. And if it doesn't, just ask Kyle for his Venmo. He'll pay you.
I mean, take the under until it gets to 40. You know, that's what I'm saying.
Oh,
just
man.
keep going.
What's the play game?
Right.
Where does this line close?
I think it closes at like 49.5.
Okay, so right now it's at 50. I mean, imagine getting that closing line value, Kyle. That is a lock.
That's as he tells his spouse,
Hey, babe, we can't.
honey, this went down half
We
a
actually
point.
can't afford dinner tonight. I put all of our money on the under 50 in this game.
Next game is the Cincinnati Bengals at the Carolina Panthers. It is an Andy Dalton revenge game, except it's not because he's great. The over-under is 47, and right now the Bengals are 4.5 point favorites. What's interesting is that I posted earlier in the week that the Panthers had their highest team implied total they've had since like 2021. And then ever since then, the line has been moving the opposite direction where they just keep getting hammered down. And I think it's smart by the people. Like I agree, like it was too high. Spoiler, I will take the Bengals in this game and the points.
Okay.
So I think that there's a lot of trust you got to have in the Panthers in this game. And I think Joe and 3 Burrow is going to be 1-3 Burrow. So, where do you want to start here?
Yeah, let's start on the Burrow side, because obviously from like an NFL standpoint, being 0-3 is not what anybody expected. But we finally saw like a get right spot for Joe Burrow last week in that Washington matchup. T. Higgins back healthy, Andre Yoshibas looking very good as their wide receiver 3, Jamar Chase doing his thing. Like, he's got his weapons now. And now you get Carolina, that the market's so excited about because of one great game. But it wasn't that long ago we were like, oh man, this roster is so bad. Now Andy Dalton obviously is an upgrade. I'm not saying he's not. But when you look at this matchup, I mean, Carolina defensively is so atrocious. They are among the worst in almost every category against the pass, against the run. So I just think like in this game, in a must, they have to win this game. The Bengals have to win, no questions asked. I think we see an awesome game from Burrow. So I want to be overweight Burrow to Chase in tournaments in this spot. And if you want to include Deontay in a game stack, I think it's fine. I think he's decent chalk, or Chuba, I think is decent chalk. I think there's a lot of ways to play it, but I just want to be in on Burrow and Chase in a game they have to have in an awesome matchup. And when you look at Chase specifically, and again, it's the 7K range of wide receiver. Rice is there, Nico's there, Marv is there. Like, Jamar Chase at like 8 to 10% sounds pretty awesome to me.
Yeah, the roster percentage for Burrow plus Chase is going to be less than a lot of different combinations. So you know that the ceiling's there. They're letting Burrow cook. He's number 1 in pass rate over expectation. It's the same story every year, right? Like, the Bengals start really slow. Zach Taylor's like, I think I want to like figure out how to run the ball this year. And then eventually like, this isn't working. Let's just let Joe Burrow cook and let him do his thing. So I do agree. I like the Bengals a lot in this game. I did go back and watch T. Higgins because he played 90% of the snaps. And you can look at that game and go, okay, so what happened? He saw 6 targets. 2 of them were inside the 5, where like he was the dude and he just miss bringing them down for touchdowns. So I do kind of like T. Higgins as a sneaky. He's in dart throw territory because people aren't going to want to play him, but he has these games where he just completely goes off. Would you be interested in a Burrow double stack in this game?
I think you can. It's tough with
in large field.
It's tough with Chase and T because they're not like outlandish expensive, but Burrow at 6,600, Chase at 7,700, and T is at 5,900. That adds up pretty quick. So you do need that stack to go bonkers if you are going to play it. I'd prefer to throw on a dart in Andre Yoshibas, who's getting some end zone targets. Mike Gesicki is fine, but he's playing like half the snaps. Like regression is going to hit him pretty soon, I think. Eric All is a fine min price like dart. He's a tight end, by the way, because you didn't know, for the Bengals, who like you're hoping for like 3 or 4 catches and a touchdown. That's how I prefer to play it, not through Chase and T, just because it is expensive. But I guess it's in play based on what we're used to with the pricing of these guys. I just think it's less likely to hit than likely to hit.
If you play that trio, I just added up the numbers, you need about 70 points to 3.5x. So I think that's doable from this group. Like, let's say that Burrow goes for 25 and you get a 100-yard bonus for one of the receivers and they get to 25 or so, then you're getting close where you just need 20 points from Higgins or Chase. It's doable, but it is asking a lot. Zach Moss is another player that you've talked about over the years, maybe your favorite. You brought him up on Tuesday. You want us to talk about him again? Like, tell me about Zach Moss.
I mean, the Panthers' run defense, man, is not good. It's not good. And the only person that could not succeed against them was Zamir White. So 10 for 35 last week, Zamir White. If he's not going to get it done in that matchup, now I know it was game script and it got away, but like still 3.5 a carry against the Panthers. Come on. So Zach Moss was getting actually a lot of work in the pass game as well. So he's a guy that I'm monitoring. I think he's in the cash conversation. The Bengals have a 26 implied team total, 25.8, very, very strong. And we like betting on this offense. The problem for me is like, if he is going to be popular, we've seen how this story plays out before, right? Where it's like, how likely is that to repeat? If he gets squeezed, especially in some of the smaller field stuff, I'm interested in him in this game. So he's like a roster percentage play only for me, where if he comes in, 10, 12%, like that's pretty strong. If he gets steamed up to somewhere around like 15, 16, 17%, I'm out on that.
The Panthers options are so funny because it's a team that a week ago we were like, oh, this team should not be in the league. And now we have Chuba, Deontay, Tremble, who are all going to be pretty popular options. And then I'm even seeing some love for Jonathan Mingo at 3,300.
Oh my gosh.
Couldn't be me. Could not be me.
Hey, every year there's a guy. If he beats me, Kyle, he beats me.
Say it. Just say it on the podcast.
I'm not playing Jonathan Mingo this week.
Oh man, I would laugh so hard if he just goes for
I'm super excited to sit down Sunday, turn on Red Zone, and all of a sudden Jonathan Mingo's catching like a 50-yard bomb in the first 5 minutes.
Leggett is expensive for not really doing anything, but Thielen's not playing. So I'm not seeing a lot for Dalton. So in a large field, if you want to get crazy again, go Dalton. That's fine. I think the best way to attack this is a Burrow stack and then just eat the chalk with either Chuba or Deontay.
Yeah, especially because on the Carolina side of things, like you're just hoping the offense flows through those two guys where, Chuba's catching enough passes. Deontay, you're hoping for another PPR friendly stat line where obviously if you play him, you want him to score a touchdown, but 9 for 95 is well within the range of outcomes here. Like you don't have to have a touchdown to produce a PPR score with Deontay. So I think he's going to get peppered. And so assuming he's healthy, like I said, I do think he's pretty decent chalk.
Mel Kiper might want to close his ears because the Bengals are allowing the second highest fantasy points per dropback against two eye safeties. So there is room for Deontay, or I think Lee gets a fun dart throw in tournaments if you just think he gets some yak plays and levels up and he gets more involved. But I will be taking Bengals and the points.
I'm going to take the Bengals as well.
All right, last game we're going to talk about here. Jacksonville Jaguars at the Houston Texans. Texans are 6.5-point home favorites. The over-under is at 45.5. This line has danced a little bit. Do we have an updated one? Because I feel like earlier it was 46 and now it's come down. I know there's been some injuries we're still waiting on. But the Texans just look so strong at this team implied total of 26, and the Jaguars total looks so bad. But Any recent updates?
Yeah, this is 45.5 as of our recording across the market. So it's kind of stabilized there.
Okay. So the Texans side hasn't looked great apart from Nico in fantasy. Joe Mixon had that awesome week 1, and then we haven't really seen him do much since. He hasn't played. Cam Akers fell flat last week. Tank Dell's not going to be playing. The play looks obvious if just you play Nico Collins or you stack him with Stroud, but is there anybody else that you like on the Texans side to just move forward and like, okay, at this price point, I think they're fine. The doctor?
Yeah, I guess he's in play. I mean, 4,100 is not egregious. It's more than I would like, if I'm being honest. But if you play Stroud, you hope he goes for 300 and throws at least 2 touchdowns, maybe 3. And obviously, I think if you're playing Stroud, you're playing it through Nico. That's what I'm going to do. And then you can tack on somebody else. Same conversation, I think, a little bit kind of like Chase and T, where it's like Diggs obviously gets a boost in projection, but Nico at 7,200, Diggs at 6,600, and Stroud at 7K, they got to do a lot to pay that off, probably more than the Burrow stack. Now, in this matchup, could it happen? Of course. CJ Stroud last year was awesome at home. He was awesome against bad defenses. That is what the Jaguars are. So it makes sense to me, but yeah, I think I prefer to play it through a cheaper route just to make sure that you're not spending too much salary. So I think the doctor's in play here at 4,100. That's and I think the way people are building, right? It's like Goddard or just punt it off with like Tommy Tremble. At least we've seen Schultz have somewhat of a ceiling over the years, so I think he's in play.
The Texans are interesting because Stroud hasn't looked as sharp, and we talked about him on the Dynasty podcast if you want a deeper kind of dive on there. But basically, Stroud's seeing zone more than anybody else, and yet he's taking sacks way more. He's almost doubled his sack rate from last year. So that's been the only thing, but this Jaguars defense is pretty banged up in a couple different ways. You know the big names in the front 7, Trayvon Walker, Joshua Hines-Allen, but the secondary is really the one that you can kind of pick apart, and so that's why we're pretty high on Nico. And with Stroud, he doesn't do a ton on the ground, but last year he did have a game against them where he threw over 300, had 2, and added 1 on the ground. So I think Stroud is fine at his price point. I did want to bring up this little nugget about Trevor Lawrence. It's a good stat.
Oh,
it's a good
there aren't
stat.
many of those these days, so please share.
It's from last year, but he did put up 27.6 DK points against the Texans in Houston last year. They won 24-21, and then after that, they've lost 8 of their last 9. So it hasn't been good since, but I do think there are some things that we can pick apart and say that there's wide receivers we like. Like I like Kirk and Thomas. I think you can use them as easy bringbacks. Brenton Strange, it's in a good spot against a team that gave up a ton to the tight end position last year. So I just think that there's enough on the Jaguars side where I don't know if they're going to keep up, but I'm totally fine with them as bringbacks.
And for sure, like if you wanted to play a Lawrence stack, I mean, at DFS, like you need to do things that make you feel uncomfortable to have leverage on the field, right? Like that's kind of how the unpredictable happens. It's how you win tournaments. Nobody's playing the Jaguars. I mean, after what we just saw on Monday night, there's not a chance. Like every player is going to be 6%, 7% or less. Maybe Brenton Strange gets steamed a little bit as like the cheap guy, but Christian Kirk, Travis Etienne, Lawrence himself, Gabe Davis. I mean, all these guys, nobody's playing. And I feel like there's going to be a game sooner or later where the Jaguars do fall behind. They have to just throw a ton and like, kind of like Dak last week, like Lawrence just gets there. Or like we've seen stuff like that from Deshaun Watson where he's not even that good on the field. It's just that he volumes his way there. Caleb Williams did that last week, right? So like you could see those outcomes where they have to throw a ton of negative game script. So I don't hate it in large field. Admittedly, it doesn't feel good, but again, that's why nobody's playing it.
Yeah, I'm just telling you right now, I'm going to be playing Trevor Lawrence in some large fields and just hoping that it goes that way because I like Nico so much on the other
and
side.
And the stacks are cheap.
Houston's allowing.
Like Lawrence, 57, Kirk, 52.
Sure.
Brian Thomas is 5,400. Gabe Davis is 4,700. Like it's a very cheap stack, and then you could build studs around it.
I mean, the value there. I mean, at the end
What
of
a
it, you could
value
build
play.
a roster.
That is a value play, Kyle. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Look at this value.
Dude, I'm going to have like $3,000 left over, you know, and I'm going to be able to just pocket that cash. That's really the strategy here. If you want to get different, play Jaguars, pocket that money for that late swap.
That value, baby.
You know? But Houston's actually struggled this year. Mel Kiper, close your ears again. Most fantasy points per dropback allowed with too high safety. And last year, when Lawrence saw two eye safety, look, Christian Kirk was the dude. 32% first read target share last year, 28%. And then Brian Thomas is a name that, if you just want to shoot for upside, I get it too. So Lawrence double stacks with the Nico bringback. Feels right. I probably won't be playing a ton of ETN, but Houston hasn't been as dominant against the run as they were last year. So if you like ETN because nobody's playing him and you just want to play ETN and Nico, totally fine with that too. So I like this game overall. It's in a dome. I think the total, I would take the over if that were me at 45.5. Overs, baby.
In the year 2024, Kyle, just when you think you know a guy. I don't have a strong lean on the spread or the total.
How dare you?
But
come on.
Nico Collins over receiving yards, whatever it is. We took it in the DFS pass yesterday at, I think, 76.5 yards. That is going to climb with Tank Dell out. So whatever it is, I like the over.
Last thought, what are you doing with Diggs?
So he's so interesting, man. I mean, we love Nico and we think he's going to smash, but leverage 101, right? Like, just what if they shut down Nico? It goes to Diggs. In a tournament, it makes so much sense. I think he could get steamed up a little bit just based off the Tank Dell injury, but in early runs that I'm seeing, like 5%, 6%, that's worth playing if that's going to hold.
That's the stuff that you want to see. I'm looking up right now Diggs splits last year because the Jaguars are a different defense than anybody else in the NFL. They play man at such a wild rate compared to everybody else. All right, Diggs last year against man, targets per out run was 24%. Yards per out run was under 2. We'll talk about a guy in just a second who, let's just say he's a man among boys. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
It's Stuart here.
In Beep, I've discovered Flowers and Flames, the new floral facet, the YSL way. It's floral, but in the hottest way, and it's both luminous. It's really such a statement. It's a real ultimate freedom sensation. So, Yves Saint Laurent.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like, to check you have the tickets in your wallet first before you drive 2 hours to the big game. Seriously, you had one job. Now the closest you'll get to the 50-yard line is parking lot D. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
We are back, and we're going to hit our slate breakers and do our pick 6. Let's get into it.
Slate Breaker of the Week.
Boy, do we have a good sponsor for us today. I went in my pantry today, and I did not know that my family purchased a bag of Bugles.
Oh, that's a throwback.
Were you a Bugles kid?
I've had a Bugle since like the 90s.
I mean, there's a reason on the bag they labeled it America's #1 finger hat. I mean,
it's the only one.
It's like, man, they got real creative. And that's it. So, you know what? It's been a while. I feel like it's a good road snack.
That's true. Yeah, you're on a road trip. You need something to bring with you. You're driving, so you can't really grab a handful. You just stick your finger in, pop one out. Yeah, I could buy it.
Yeah, no, Bugles were great. I'm going to give my slate breaker. I only think we've mentioned this player's name 20 times in this episode so far. So it makes sense that we would bring up Nico Big Chunk Collins one more time. Jacksonville is as hard-headed as they get, and there's a reason they're 0-3. They play man coverage more than anyone else in football. How much so? Through 3 weeks, they are running man on 61% of their charted plays per fantasy points. A whopping 54% of their plays are cover one, making this a true man among boys matchup for Nico Collins. His 28% targets per out run and 3.52 yards per out run against man last year. That is legendary stuff. Last year among wide receivers, against man, he was third behind only CeeDee and Tyreek in fantasy points per route run against man. Take it to the bank. Nico Collins, slate breaker. Spend all the money you can.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, like wide receivers in general, when they get steamed up to be 20%, 25%, sometimes feels like you need to kind of pivot off of it, but there's a reason he's going to be popular. It's because he's a standout play on the slate. So I'm with you. I will definitely be overweight Nico and just hope he goes crazy here at home, which I think he will. I'm going to also throw out a wide receiver we've talked about on this show, and go to Jamar Chase for a couple reasons. One is just finally we saw the Bengals get back on track. And I thought maybe roster percentage would kind of follow that, just recency bias of a primetime game. It does not look like it's going to. So when you think about price point pivots in the 7K range, Jamar Chase, one of the best team totals, one of the best matchups, Burrow healthy. This offense should roll. I want to be in on that this week. So this is a must-win game. I think Joe Burrow goes to Jamar Chase over and over again. And they've had at least one wide receiver cook in this matchup against Carolina. Trey Tucker, 796-1. Jacoby Myers, 762-1. Quentin Johnston, 2 weeks ago, 551-2.
Cook, huge. Cook,
the
baby.
Boys. Rashid Shaheed, 73 yards and a touchdown. Like, wide receivers that are not necessarily the elite of the elite are getting there in these spots. Jamar Chase should just go off in the spot. So I love Jamar Chase, love Nico. I think those two guys are good players to be overweight on this week.
You know what? Just for the heck of it, I'm going to play them together because I know there's going to be roster combinations where people take somebody from the 7K range. They take Chase or Marv or Rashee Rice or Collins, and then they're just dipping down to the Deontay Johnson, those kind of names. And I feel like spending up at two spots here is just going to get you different than a lot of other people. I mean, you said I'm seeing Chase 7, 8, 9%. So under 10% is just awesome for somebody that you saw go off last week. I love it. Those are our slate breakers. Nico Collins, Jamar Chase. What could go wrong? Moving on.
It's time for Borg vs. Betz, presented by DraftKings.
That's right. We're back with another edition of Pick6. No sportsbook, no problems. You can play DraftKings Pick6 with us. And Betz, update the people because we are still running hot.
Yeah, so unfortunately, last week the George Kittle injury happened after we recorded. He did not play, so that voided, obviously. So we are combined 9-2 between the two of us. You're 5-1. I am 4-1 with that voided bet, but we're looking good, man. Let's keep it rolling.
Yep, the one that cost me. Who knew that he would come back to bite me? Cade Otton.
Dude, whenever we pick on Cade, he must listen to the show. He's like, hey, Baker, these boys are doubting me. Give me the ball. Give me the rock, he says. And he goes off.
I just love his consistency. In my routes run league, man, I am slaying in my routes run league. And Dotson, man. I got Dotson in that league too.
Oh, that's the league you need. It's just the finger tape, the wrist tape, no gloves. Like, it's nostalgic.
I'm not in a routes run league, people. I feel like I was going to get messaged by like 5 people about that kind of stuff. But I do want to do it like baseball style where you do categories. And I think that would be really, really fun to have 6 or 7 categories that you say there's a routes one and you're just going for pure just volume, man. MVS was an all-star years ago. All right, so I will give my first one. My first pick on the pick 6 this week is Colby Parkinson less than 29.5 receiving yards. Kupp and Puka are out, and so you could think, sweet, this guy's going to get more opportunity. In fact, what Sean McVay's offenses have always been, they've been wide receiver centric. And so they've actually asked him to block a ton more the last 2 weeks, 0.65 yards per route run, and he's running way fewer routes. He's been under this last 2 weeks, just 12 and 21 receiving yards. And any chance I can to take an under on a tight end that maybe we'll see 3 targets, 4 targets, it's easy for me to do that. So less on Colby Parkinson's receiving yards, 29.5.
Yeah, last week they actually played a ton of 12 personnel, did the Rams, which is not normal, but it tells you kind of how they feel about the current state of their wide receiver room with their injuries. So I actually like that call quite a bit. I'm going to take Garrett Wilson less than 58.5 receiving yards. We always say wide receiver matchups with cornerbacks don't matter, whatever, yada, yada, yada. I think Pat Surtain matters. I think he's just that good. DK Metcalf in this matchup, 3 for 29. George Pickens, 2 for 29. Mike Evans, 2 for 17. I think Garrett Wilson is going to see a lot of Surtain. And the way that people have attacked this defense, or offenses have attacked this defense, is to run the football. They play slow. They're at home. They're favored by 7.5 points. I just think Breece is going to touch the ball, and Braylon Allen touch the ball a ton, and I just don't think Garrett Wilson's going to be needed in this matchup. So give me less than 58.5 receiving yards.
Yeah, you and I talked through that game earlier in the week about Aaron Rodgers, where some of his lines are at. It seems like a game that's just going to be slow. And Denver, same thing. They're just that game's going to be one of those games where it wouldn't shock me if it's 16-13 or something like that, where it's just at the end of the day, you didn't really love any of the pieces outside of Brees for home leagues. And I feel bad for Garrett Wilson because I pick on him sometimes, but he's got a ton of other bad matchups too after this.
Yeah, the schedule for the Jets is pretty brutal coming up, actually.
And at some point, you're like, everybody's got tough matchups, and they just figure it out. So you saw that quote last week from Justin Jefferson where people are asking him about people game planning. He goes, I'm not Garrett Wilson.
No disrespect, but I'm not Garrett Wilson. I mean, I love J Jets, but that was so funny.
I feel like he was genuinely like trying to be, not like he wasn't trying to be a jerk.
No, he wasn't. But it was
like,
just like, look at this flex, but also that's how good I am.
Dude, he's always open.
He's so good.
All the time. All right, my next one is for Alvin Kamara. His middle name is Minshean. I want to make sure that I'm saying it correctly. Mention. Minshean?
Why did you put that in the doc?
Because I love middle names. I have a whole doc that has everybody's middle names in the league.
Okay, weirdo.
Alvin Minshean, Kamara over or more than his receiving yards of 27.5. So far this year, he's gotten 27, 65, 40. He's touched the ball on 41% of Saints plays this year. That's number one among all running backs. I said earlier, I'm worried about his overall line of 100.5 rushing and receiving, but I do think he gets involved in the air. I do think he's going to get a lot of easy opportunities against the Falcons. So I will take more on his receiving yards of 27.5.
All right, Kyle, this is kind of a little scary, but I'm going to take more than 223 pass yards for Caleb Williams.
Who are you anymore?
Now, if these trends continue, Kyle, okay, let's follow the path here. Week 1, 48% completion rate, 3.2 YPA. That was ugly. Week 2, 62% completion rate, 4.7 YPA. Week 3, 64% completion rate, 7 YPA. So if these trends continue, we're talking about a 70% completion rate and 7.5 YPA. In all seriousness, this is a really good matchup for the Bears pass game. The Rams have allowed league highs in completion, yards, and touchdowns on deep pass attempts. Looks like Keenan might be back this week. The run game is broken. You have to throw on the Rams. Like, it all lines up here for Caleb, I think, to go over this line. So we didn't talk about that game, by the way, for DFS. I'm kind of interested in like sneaky Caleb stacks. He is super cheap. Nobody's playing DJ Moore. Rome Odunze had a very nice game last week. I don't know if I can get there on Keenan just with like the heel concerns, but just in general, I think the Bears pass game is what you want this week, and specifically Caleb goes over. I think DeAndre Swift gets borderline benched this week. They bring in Roschon Johnson, who's better in the pass game anyway, so like it all lines up to me to say Caleb Williams should have a nice day through the air.
No, that makes a lot of sense. DJ Moore was Andy's start of the week, and I was doing some research because that yards per pass attempt is the second highest of any team over the last 5 years to start a season. So it's not just the Rams are bad. They're like historically bad in the secondary, and I think you can take advantage of that. So just to recap for you guys, Colby Parkinson, less than 29.5 receiving yards. Alvin Kamara, more than 27.5 receiving yards. Betz took Garrett Wilson, less than 58.5 receiving yards. And Caleb Williams, more than 223.5 passing yards. That was Borg versus Betz, presented by DraftKings Pick6. Download the new DraftKings Pick6 app now and use code BALLERS. That's code BALLERS for new customers to play $5 and get $50 in Pick6 credits. Betz, that's going to do it for us. Sign us off and tell me I'm going to be safe.
I hope you're safe. I hope everybody is safe out there, in all seriousness. We're going to be back next week, and you will know by the tone of our voice Tuesday morning if we're happy or sad when you see Nico Collins play football this weekend. So, Nico, please be good. We need you. We'll catch you guys next week. Have a great weekend.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Must be 18 and over. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Void where prohibited. One per new customer. Non-withdrawable Pick6 credits expire in 6 months. Limited time offer. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.